Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Booms and Bus Show. My name is Jonathan Davis, and it is Monday, the 29th of May. It's a bank holiday in the United Kingdom, which is when the banks do what they usually do and not function particularly well. And this show is about free markets and capitalism, avowedly anti-cronyism, anti-socialism, and as I've explained time and time again, cronyism, socialism, it's all on the same spectrum of communism, fascism, and you just have to laugh when people say communism, fascism, they're two entirely different things. Well, you know, when you're at the end of a firing squad because you dared to criticise the government or the religion, there's not much difference, I can assure you. And no, fascism is about state ownership. Communism is, of course, about state ownership, and so on and so on. You know, if you want to learn about it, it's very easy to find out about these things. Look, if you want to contact me, please do so, and I do love having your contact. Email me at jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com. More frequent contact, I guess, would be on the Twitter feed at boomsbustshow, which is a lively Twitter account. A lot, unfortunately, to talk about Islamic bombers and suicide bombers and killers and murderers and rapists and gangbangers and paedophiles, and it's just unbelievable. If Israel or Jewish people did 1,000th of what these animals do, there would be serious calls. In other words, it would be listened to seriously to nuke Israel and to deport Jews. 1,000th. And yet these people, they get away with it. It's just, the world is an astonishing place. Thank you so much for those of you who tweet about the show and retweet. Appreciate it immensely. The show number of downloads has grown on a chart from bottom left to top right, almost in a straight line since March when I started, which is fantastic. It is probably worth pointing out that I'll be, of course, doing the show every Monday through June and July. And then in August, I'm taking the month off. We'll be off to France, as we always do, to the west of France. Talking about capitalism and competition in the markets, which is what helps the people and not the elite. You look at the airline business. I'm seeing so many tweets today about how British Airways treat their passengers, their customers, so awfully. In fact, the Daily Mail is even calling for the company, which incidentally is headquartered in Spain, to have the name British taken away because its service is so bad. You look in America, you've got 4 major airlines there, which control the vast majority of the domestic market in the US. Thus, it's an oligopoly. Monopoly, one company. Duopoly, 2 companies. Oligopoly, a small number of companies controlling the market. Thus, they can do what the heck they like. You saw about the poor Chinese descent doctor being dragged forcefully from a United Airlines passenger jet before takeoff. I mean, no doubt the guy can now retire on his compensation. I mean, no doubt he earned a fortune from that. But nobody knew that was what's going to happen. The fact is, he was forcefully dragged along the floor of a passenger jet. Why? Because the oligopolist airline had overbooked. They had sold more seats than they had on the normal expectation. This is what they do day to day, on the normal expectation that some people just wouldn't turn up or could be moved to another flight. Well, on this occasion, and indeed many other occasions, it turns out more and more people are saying, no, I don't want $300, $500. I want to go at the time that I said I want to go, and I want to arrive at the time I said I want to arrive. And we're seeing more and more terrible treatment of passengers. If it wasn't an oligopoly, if there was more competition in the market, do you think the airlines would be overselling something that they don't have? And if you think about it, in any case, how can you sell something you don't have? Why is that not illegal? And why is my voice not illegal? I ruined my voice a few nights ago. Long story. I'm not going to go into it. But it involves something to do with our indoors. And by the way, that's British for my wife. And unfortunately, something happened to her car. And we had to get the breakdown recovery company. One of the biggest companies in the UK is the RAC. We had to get the RAC, for which we believed we had a policy that to get them to take us basically to the local garage. And that night, it was Friday night, in fact, the day before the bank holiday weekend. Today is a bank holiday, as I say. And would you believe it took us 25 minutes to get through to them to register our issue and to explain that we need a recovery to take us, whatever it was, 3 or 4 miles to our favoured garage. Well, we then spoke to the young lady and she logged the call and blah, blah, blah. And I drove to my wife who had the kids, and I gave her my car, and she and the kids drove off, and I stayed with the broken down car and waited for the RAC to arrive. I got a call half an hour later saying, for a normal guy to turn up, just to look at your car, it's up to 90 minutes. But I've just seen that it's a breakdown, a recovery situation where you need to be taken somewhere. Of course, my immediate thought is, well, how come whoever you are, you've just seen it, the young lady took the details, she knew it. Well, that's going to be several hours. Several hours. Do you know what time it was now? It was 10 o'clock at night. So I said, well, what's the alternative? And he said, well, look, you can leave the car there. We'll get you a taxi, take you home. And then in the morning, you'll have the recovery guy go and take you, blah, blah, blah. I said, you know what? That sounds perfectly fine. Can you send the taxi in the next 15, 30 minutes? Yeah, not a problem. An hour later, no taxi. An hour and a half, no taxi. During which time, I'm on my smartphone and Sue is rapidly on her computer at home trying to find the policy number, because we, when we spoke to RAC, we didn't actually have the policy number with us. And she came across that we don't even have RAC insurance, breakdown recovery insurance. It's actually with a company called Britannia, which is also a big company in that field. So massive embarrassment. So bearing in mind, it's an hour and a half that I've been sitting there waiting for the taxi. Now, a taxi should take, 10 minutes, maybe? An hour and a half. So I cancel the bloomin' taxi. By the way, after an hour and 50 minutes, I couldn't get through to RAC. I cancelled the taxi directly because at least I had their details. I tried to get through to RAC. I phoned them for literally an hour and 5 minutes, and then it went dead. Can you believe this? Now, of course, I'm sitting in the car. There's nothing I can do. So, it's not as if it was stopping me doing something. But an hour and 5 minutes, and I couldn't get through to RAC breakdown recovery. And I could have been a new breakdown person. I could have had a serious accident. And I couldn't get through. And bearing in mind, we didn't have insurance with them. But they'd logged our details, and they were anyway sending the recovery guy in the morning, and they said, make sure you give the policy number to that guy. So fair enough, they were going to get the details. So I needed to get through back to them to say, we don't have a policy with you. Cancel the recovery, man. I couldn't get through to them. We were then back on the phone to them at 1 o'clock in the morning. We couldn't get through to them. We phoned Britannia. Listen to this. My wife came and got me. We left the car. We phoned Britannia at 12:30 in the morning. We got through within 3 minutes. And we arranged for the recovery guy for 8 o'clock that morning. 3 minutes. We had to phone them at for 9 o'clock that morning. We had to phone them at 7:30 to say, we're ready. Please confirm, please get the recovery guy, because we had to give them 90 minutes notice to absolutely confirm it. When we phoned the following morning, yes, we got your details. That's confirmed. We got through within 2 minutes. And 20 minutes later, we got a phone call from the recovery guy at 10 to 8. I'm just arriving at your car. How long can you be? Will be 15 minutes. The difference between RAC and Britannia was chalk and cheese, black and white. Unbelievable. But listener, that's the point of capitalism. If we were in socialism or cronyism, there wouldn't be a large number of recovery companies. There would be 1, 2, 3 companies, and they would treat you like dirt and charge the earth in premiums. This is capitalism, listener. Don't listen to socialists. Don't listen to cronyists. Capitalism is what helps the people. It's socialism and cronyism, fascism and communism, Stalinism is what helps the elite. Look at the photo that I've tweeted alongside the iTunes tweet. There is your city on socialism. There is your hospital on socialism. Think about Venezuela. And there is your politician on socialism. Think about Venezuela. And Venezuela is just one horrible, horrific example of socialism compared to free market capitalism. Look at Switzerland. Pretty free markets. Look at Hong Kong. Look at Taiwan. Look at Singapore. Pretty free markets. Look at the standard of living of the people. Do they have rich people? They have astonishingly rich people. But the standard of living in Switzerland and Singapore is a whole scale level above our standard of living, because they've got more free markets than we do. Remember, crony capitalism is the use of laws, regulations, taxes, price controls, tariffs, trade barriers, administrative discretion in order to protect the friends of the government. Cronyism. You want to see how capitalism helps the poor and the bottom 90%? Just look at that chart of the cost of food, which has decreased dramatically over the last century, and the trend is still down. I see that, of course, it's risen in the last few years. Now, okay, this only goes up to 2010, but it's fallen since 2010 to 2017. The trend is down. Look at 1915, look at 1950, look at 1980, look at 2010. The trend is clearly down. Was that socialism? Was it heck? It was free market capitalism. It was globalization. It was technology. It was transportation. Who invented the transportation? Did socialists invent it? No. And then we move on to the academic side of things and what they teach in schools. And over the last couple of days, it's the half-term holiday for the kids. And when my 12-year-old goes back to school next week, she's going to have a week or two of exams. She's at the end of her first year in secondary school, or some of you call it high school. And she learned early in the year about the power of monarchs over the people. She learned that before Magna Carta in the 12th century, the monarch had absolute power. Click his fingers and you're dead. You're imprisoned. Your sheep and your goats and your cows and your horses are stolen. Your wife, your daughter is raped. Your monarch had absolute power. Magna Carta, the first document in the history of human beings, laid down that every man was free. You could no longer have your woman stolen from you. You no longer could be imprisoned without a fair trial. And the barons couldn't be taxed without their express agreement, as it were. Okay, it wasn't nirvana, but it was a vast improvement on everything that had gone before in all the tens of thousands of years of human history. And then that lasted until the 17th century, when we got the Declaration of Rights. And what did this do? Absolutely fascinating. It moved the governing body of the country from the king or queen to Parliament. And of course, Parliament, in the ideal world, represents the people. Now, we know about the cronyism and we know about the nonsense that politicians get up to. But would you rather go back to monarchic control? Exactly. And that's very interesting about how the relationship between the monarch and the people has changed over the centuries. And it's taken literally hundreds and hundreds of years to make that change. And she's also been learning about how we moved from a farming economy through the Industrial Revolution. And at first, when I looked at it, it seemed to me that the socialist know-nothing teachers, who think they know everything, of course, were pushing the mantra, the Industrial Revolution was terrible because young children were practically slave labour in dangerous jobs. Because they were so small, they went down the mines, they went under the machines, and they broke their legs and whatever, and it was terrible. And they worked 29 hours a day, and they had to pay the mill owner for privilege of working. I refer you to the Four Yorkshiremen sketch. I'm not doubting for one moment that it was a hell on earth for many hundreds of thousands and possibly millions of folk in the 18th and into the 19th century. I don't doubt that for one moment. But actually, the teachers didn't do it all one-sided. They did do it mostly one-sided. The cities were overcrowded. It was cramped living. It was 10 to a room. They were smoky. People died from all the health issues and so on. And they really laid it on thick. But they did also. I'm looking at what she's been learning. They did also show other people who at that time wrote biographies and autobiographies and discussed in the press at the time that actually there was an alternative view. For example, because of machinery, and this is an astonishing statistic, machines could produce 3,500 times the number of goods that an individual could produce in the year 1700. And we're talking about the early to mid 19th century. So in a century and a quarter, a century and a half, production went up 3,000 times. So of course what that meant was society got richer because more people could buy stuff which previously was massively prohibitive in price. You could actually buy a pair of shoes. You could buy a coat. You could buy food. And of course, with the velocity of money, which I talked a little bit about last week, when more money is around that can be spent and used in the system, then more people can use that money, buy stuff, and improve their standard of living. So I don't doubt for one moment that it was hell on earth when you worked in those factories 6 days a week, 15 hours a day, or whatever it was. I don't doubt it was hellish. And I wouldn't want it on I would not mind having it on my worst enemy, but I wouldn't want it on the vast majority of folk. But the fact is, the Industrial Revolution ultimately brought us to look at that price of food. It brought hundreds of millions, if not billions of people out of starvation and abject poverty. Look at China. Was it 1.3 billion people? 700, 800, 900 million people have come out of poverty. That is a truly remarkable economic and social statistic. Hundreds of millions now have work and a good lifestyle, just like you and me. Absolutely breathtaking. Now, last week, I laid massively into Trump because he has or had achieved precisely none of his aims that he spouted again and again daily for 2 years before he was elected. But you know what? That seems to me to have somewhat changed last week. 2 things he did. One, as many of you will know, he laid into NATO leaders and told them, pay up. You're not paying enough into NATO. Even, he said, Greece pays 2% of its spending on NATO, on defence, and you guys don't. And of course, Merkel and the socialist establishment absolutely despised it. The BBC, the Channel 4, loved all the garbage that she came out with. Basically, I can't work with this guy anymore. Well, I'm not bloomin' surprised, Frau Merkel. For once, you're actually going to have to pay your way. And the French too, and the Italians, and so on. Did you see the furore over Trump not wearing headphones to listen to the Italian Prime Minister? 14,000 people that I saw retweeted elitist BBC James Landale's tweet. 14,000, where he was making the quip, look at Donald Trump sitting there, everyone else got headphones, he's not got headphones, he can't be bothered listening to the Prime Minister of Italy. Such disrespect. Of course, he didn't give opinion, he just made snide suggestion, as they do. Trump was wearing a wireless earphone. He was listening intently. Did you see the BBC apology? Was there one? So first he laid into NATO leaders. Good for him. Brownie points. And 2, even better for him. It is reported, and of course not many people saw it because this isn't reported generally, that he had a shouting match with Mahmoud Abbas, the billionaire president of the Palestinian Authority. You think he was a billionaire before he became president? Why? Because Abbas lied to his face when Abbas visited Washington, D.C., visited the White House, where he said he was doing everything he can to get peace between Palestine and Israel. Trump, after that visit, was then informed of the following. The Palestinian Authority, did you know this, pays convicted and then freed by Israel terrorists, murderers. They pay these murderers huge pensions on release. And when I say huge, you wouldn't believe the amounts we're talking. They name schools and hospitals after these terrorists who, as I say, who commit their acts of barbarism in Israel. They are then caught by the Israeli Defense Forces. Are they hanged, drawn and quartered? Are they tortured? They are prosecuted through habeas corpus in a court of law, and if found guilty, they are then jailed appropriately. Because Israel doesn't have capital punishment. And these terrorists serve their time and then are released back into the community. And they go back to Palestine and they are given, it's like winning the lottery. These people are showered with daily praise in the media. Look at the photo of Mahmoud Abbas, that kindly old gentleman that you've seen on the BBC and Channel 4 News many times before. We welcome every drop of blood spilled in Jerusalem. Mahmoud Abbas's 1982 doctoral dissertation discussed, quote, the secret relationship between Nazism and Zionism, unquote. In 1984, a study by him based on his dissertation, which he presented to Moscow's Oriental College, was actually published in Arabic in Jordan. In the introduction to the 1984 study, his study, he referred to well-known Holocaust deniers. He raised doubts that gas chambers were used for extermination of Jews and claimed that the number of Jews murdered in the Holocaust might be, quote, even less than 1 million, unquote. He claimed that the Zionist movement had a stake in convincing world opinion that the number of victims was high, thus it would achieve, quote, greater gains, unquote, after the war, when the time came to, quote, distribute the spoils, unquote. And you get at Israel. So 2 massive brownie points to Donald J. Trump. Mr. Trump, I do hope you put some quality people into the Federal Reserve, as I discussed extensively last week. On verra. 32 minutes. Moving on. In America, the smallest 50% of companies, listen to this, are paying now 30% of their profits just on interest on debt. This is the highest proportion of profits being paid on interest since 2002. How is this possible when in 2002 the interest rate was several times the interest rate we have now? It's obvious, because the interest on lending to small companies is not the lowest. It's like credit cards. The base rate may be under 1%, but credit cards are 20%. And this is why when the Federal Reserve raised the interest rate in December 15 by 0.25% to 0.25%, and then in December 16 by 0.25% to 0.5%, and in March this year by 0.25% to 0.75%, why each 0.25% rise actually acts on the economy like a 0.75% rise. It's a very significant rise in interest rates every little 0.25%, which is why, another reason why the US could find its economic peak this year. Indeed, irrespective of many indications of problems in the US economy, there are some still amazing bright lights in the US economy, don't get me wrong, But there are many indications of problems in the economy. Why raising interest rates now is beyond stupid and purely political, whereas, of course, they should have been raising interest rates a few years ago. But, of course, that was purely political, of course, as well. Why? Who was the president? Talking about problems in the economy, Daniel Ruiz, check him out on Twitter. He's done some amazing research on the auto industry, the car industry, car sales, car prices, car lending in the United States. And from what I'm seeing, the UK is probably only a few to 6 months behind. The next chart shows that the stock of cars for sale in relation to cars sold is the highest since the recession. And if you were to take away the recession, it's the highest stock to sales since the early 1990s, 25 years ago. So we could be entering another phase like 2008, where, as you can see, there was a massive unsold number of cars, which is why they brought in cash for clunkers. Cronyism, in other words, because they'd made too many cars. And if they instead had done it properly, they'd have closed down plants. Instead, they kept their blooming plants going, pretending all was well, knowing that they'd be bailed out when it hit the fan, just like the banks. Huge. This chart is huge. I mean, you look at it, it's absolutely huge. I talked again similarly last week about the yield curve on government bonds. And there is a chart from the Federal Reserve. FRED stands for Federal Reserve Economics Department. And it shows the 10-year rate, the rate at which the US government borrows over a 10-year period, minus the rate at which the government borrows over 2 years. And when the differential is falling, it means that the 10-year rate is falling faster than the 2-year rate, which may also be faster. And if the longer term rate is falling faster, the interest rate the government borrows is falling faster, then that of course means that lenders are prepared to accept a lower rate of interest for lending to the government. Why would they do that? Because they smell deflation or lower inflation. Thus, they're prepared to accept a lower interest rate to lend money. And when the yield curve, as we call it, is falling, that is suggesting the economy is less buoyant. And indeed, we got down to 0.75 in the summer of 2016. We got below zero in 2008. The trend is clearly down. We've got lower highs, 2014, 2015, 2016. We've got lower lows, 2015, 2016. If this next low is a lower low again, whoa, it could go down towards zero. And if it does, indeed, if it breaks zero, it's 99%. The US is in recession. But, it hasn't happened yet. But it's heading there, as you can easily see. And this is the thing. Everyone else can easily see it too. The Federal Reserve can easily see it. And yet they're raising interest rates. And they're very likely to do so in 2 weeks' time. and I've been saying so for weeks. Now, I've been very, very bullish on precious metals for pretty well throughout these shows since March. Last week, suddenly I said, hey, wait a minute. Things could turn down for the next week or 3 or 4 is what I said, and I explained. I've had a couple of people say to me, tell us again why you changed your position. Well, I haven't changed my medium-term position. I'm absolutely still of the view, without a shadow of a doubt, actually, that we are going to see the mother of rallies in gold, silver and gold miners, but in a couple or a few weeks' time. What I saw was that the yen stopped rising against the dollar. And there is a very clear correlation, yen up, gold up. So it seemed to me that the yen was going to fall again against the dollar, not long term or anything like that, but as I say, it looked as if there was a correction going on in the trend of the yen rising against the dollar. And indeed, we've seen the dollar have a chink of a rise against the pound, the euro and the yen. Also, we see small mining company share prices fall, whereas the price of gold was not doing so. And small mining tends to be, pardon the pun, the canary in the coal mine or the gold mine. And they tend to move first. So I absolutely expect miners to continue falling for another couple of weeks, and indeed gold to have a sharp reversal. Doesn't mean it's huge reversal, but sharp nonetheless. And then it sets off a huge rally. The trend is still up. The low point in the bear market was for gold December 15. For miners, curiously, it's just one of those things, it was January 16, but as I say, generally the miners move first. Moving on to something which may surprise you. You know this thing about the wall between the southern border of the US and Mexico? Well, of course, everyone was therefore saying, well, Mexico's toast, isn't it? It has to be, and all this nonsense. Don't listen to the media. Don't listen to the commentators. For goodness sake, stop buying the newspaper. Stop it. If you want to read something, download from the internet and read it on the train. And maybe read the things that, for example, I mentioned in the show last week. But don't read newspapers. They don't help you. They're not educating you. They are not there to help you. They're there to sell adverts and sell subscriptions. But it's interesting. What we're seeing is the Mexican economy really strong. And I mean really strong. And that is reflected both in the stock market and the peso, the currency. The whole Mexican-Texan Midwest corridor is such a strong region of the world. I'd go so far as wonder, admittedly on a smaller scale, I wonder if it's the new China. Just have a look and see how many folk live in Mexico, who are, of course, right next to America. The logistics of transportation are far easier. Mexico is the future. It's very interesting. Which leads me to, you look at any chart of stock markets and you've seen for the last several years, US markets out on their own, up, 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 bottom left, top right, up, 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 on the way. It's been amazing. But, nothing goes on forever. And it seems to me that we're going to see a huge pivot. It might already have started, or it might be over the next year. But the pivot is that all the other markets are going to now outperform, if they haven't already started, the US market. So the developed markets ex-US are going to outperform the US. Emerging markets, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Mexico, Indonesia, etc., are going to outperform developed markets ex-US. And this is the most interesting thing. Frontier markets, like some of the Latin American countries, some of the Middle Eastern countries, some of the Southeast Asian countries, some of the ex-USSR countries, frontier markets have the greatest growth potential. So you could write this down. You know that symbol on your keyboard that's like a point to the right and a point to the left? You could write FM, point to the right, EM, point to the right, ex-US, point to the right, US. In other words, frontier markets are going to outperform emerging markets, which are going to outperform ex-US, which is going to outperform the US. And I refer you to Jeremy Grantham's outlook that, again, I talked about last week. As I say, it might already have started. You should be looking into these things for the next 10 years. So we're talking about retirement planning and retirement investing. We're not talking about speculating for the next 6 or 12 months what's going to happen to gold. Are we going into recession? No, we're talking about allocating your retirement funds appropriately. And incidentally, I should point out, I'm talking about relative outperformance. If there's a global recession, all bets are off. But if you are still heavily invested in the US, the UK and Euro stocks, the recession's not going to help you. On the contrary, I'm talking relative outperformance. I'm talking about within the asset class of global shares. I have to take a drink of water. Oh, that's better. Not much. Have you seen the price of fuel at the pump? Have you seen it falling? Well, oil has been up to last year the early $50 a barrel, and it's been bouncing all over. It looks like it could well revisit the low 40s or maybe even the high 30s. You know, they talk about OPEC, they talk about shale oil in America. Whatever the reasons, this is what the chart is suggesting. If indeed it goes down to the low 40s, maybe even the very high 30s, and it breaks that, well, you know, good night Vienna, we're going down to $20 a barrel, and we are going into global recession. But actually, my base case continues that we could well go down to the late 30s, early 40s. It's still a bull market since $26 in March of 16. And that base case is that we're heading towards the mid 60s and maybe even the low 70s. Thus, we're not heading into global recession until we get a sustained downturn in the oil price. And all the bears out there, and I see them tweeting all the time, I'd love to join them. I really would. I'd love to join them. I'd love to go 70% government bonds, US treasuries. But, you know, I've been there so many times over the last 10, 15 years. What people say and what people think is absolutely irrelevant. What I think about the markets, the outlook for the markets, is absolutely irrelevant. The charts tell me that oil is still in the bull market unless it breaks below the high 30s. Thus, we're still in mild reflation. Thus, the global economy is still in mild expansion. The bears just cracked me up. I don't know if I said it in the show, but there was a 1.2 or 1.3% fall one day a couple of weeks ago in the S&P 500. It's at all-time highs. It had a 1.2% fall. And some numpty who thinks he actually understands markets is telling me, because I was saying nothing to be concerned about, he's telling me, oh, you're joking. Look at the chart. 2008 Mark II has started all over again. It's laughable. If these people are right, well, good luck to them, but that's all it is. It's just luck. Because they've been saying it for years now. 2008 Mark II is round the corner. I also said it in 2015. But then when 2016 came and we clearly saw markets reversing, I changed my tune. When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? Said John Maynard Keynes. Look at the chart of S&P 500 performance since the beginning of the year. The blue line is the S&P 500. It's up just under 8%. The black line is the S&P 500, but if you take away the growth of just 5 companies, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft and Google. Without those companies' growth, the whole of the S&P 500, the other 495 companies, would have grown 4.5%. But with just those 5 companies, it's raised the performance of the 500 index by over 3%. That's remarkable. That shows you how weighted the S&P 500 is to such a small number of huge mega multi-hundred billion dollar companies. When they move the market. We had a bear market from the second half of 2014 to early 16. We had a bear market. People didn't believe me when I was saying to them how dreadful things were. It was a bear market because even though ultimately the S&P 500 only fell 15% over 2 years, some 40% of the market fell over 40%. And many others fell over 20%. There's no question it was a full-blown bear market. But it didn't reflect in the index, so people didn't look at it. Nobody talked about it. So there is a very clear explanation of what market breadth is. When you see a high percentage of the index rising or falling, then you say market breadth is strong or weak. But when you see a small number of the market rising, then you say, well, clearly there's something wrong in the market if the market is rising but the breadth is falling. The market is rising. The breadth is about neutral at the moment. It's by no means positive. It's also not negative. But for the moment, the index as a whole is in a bull market. So, we have to go with that until it stops. And finally, moving to quotes of the week. And for the first time, we're going to have 3 quotes of the week. Sam Harris. Quote, "There is an obvious, undeniable, and hugely consequential moral difference between Israel and her enemies." Unquote. When you think of martial arts movies, who's the first person you think of? David Carradine? No. How dare you, David Carradine? The guy was a professional dancer. He couldn't tell karate from the aftershave, high karate. Bruce Lee, of course, a supreme martial artist. And I'd be interested to hear if at the time, if there was anyone better in the world that we know of. I suspect there wasn't. He was such a high-level expert in so many of those disciplines. But he wasn't just an amazing martial artist. He was also a really, really good film actor. And before that, TV actor. He played the sidekick, the Hornet. And Seth Rogen did a pretty good film of the Hornet a few years ago. I saw it on telly last year. It's pretty good. It's a bit of slapstick, but it's actually not bad. But of course, Bruce Lee was a consummate philosopher, wasn't he? And thinker. And I haven't got this one written down, but it's imprinted on my brain. He said, "I don't fear the man who practices 10,000 things once. I fear the man who practices one thing 10,000 times." You want to teach your kids about achievement? It's not about luck. It's about getting up in the morning and working your butts off for years. And finally, from Bruce Lee, and this gets to the core of what I'm trying to achieve with the Booms and Bust show. I'm trying to share with those who listen how I see the world, how I see what's happening, and how angry and depressed I am on the one hand, but that I'm not going to give in to it. I'm not going to say, well, there's nothing I can do. For one thing, I can get off my butt, spend a small fortune on podcasting equipment, learn how to do a podcast, and then do it week after week and spread the message of free markets, of capitalism, of liberty, of freedom, and standing up for yourself and getting out there and doing it and not giving up. That's the first thing I can do. And secondly, I can spread the message of what everyone else can do to help themselves. Because I'm telling you, listener, in the next recession, there won't be a government around to help you. They'll help themselves. They'll help their friends in the elite. But because they can't slash interest rates, you tell me how they're going to bail you out again. In fact, if you're already pretty wealthy, you're going to be knackered because they're going to bail you in, as I've also spoken about. So what can you do to help yourselves? Well, listen to this. The most dangerous person is one who listens, thinks, and observes. Bruce Lee. Listener, I've had a blast. I'll see you next week.